I pay more taxes than you earn, Judge, so stop lecturing me now. Sit down now, or I'll personally make sure your entitlement destroys nothing.
A billionaire's wife blocked an ambulance. Inside that ambulance, a 6-year-old girl was fighting for her life. This woman didn't panic. She didn't apologize. She didn't move. Instead, she went live on Instagram and laughed. And when that video played inside Judge Judy's courtroom, it didn't just decide a case. It destroyed a life. The courtroom was heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the palpable tension of a looming disaster, but Juliana Vanderbilt didn't seem to notice. She sat in the defendant's chair, her posture radiating the kind of bored, aristocratic indifference that only comes from a life where every problem is solved by a wire transfer. Her lavender Tesla, a custom-ordered vehicle that cost more than most American homes, was more than just a car to her. It was a mobile throne. To Juliana, the laws of the road were merely suggestions for the lower class, and emergency lanes were nothing more than VIP bypasses for her busy social calendar. She adjusted her gold Rolex, her eyes scanning the room with a look of utter disdain, completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to face the one woman in America who couldn't be bought, bullied, or impressed by a billionaire's tax return. Judge Judy sat behind the bench, her eyes hidden behind her glasses, but the way her pen moved across her notepad suggested she had already seen something in the preliminary filings that made her blood run cold. This wasn't just a case about a traffic delay. It was a collision between extreme entitlement and the raw, unfiltered reality of a life-or-death emergency. The silence in the room was nuclear, the kind of quiet that precedes a massive storm, and Juliana's smirk was the lightning rod that was about to draw the strike. The story began on a Tuesday afternoon that should have been routine for David, a veteran paramedic who had spent 15 years saving lives on the streets of the city. He was in the back of ambulance 42, his hands steady despite the chaos, as he worked to stabilize a 6-year-old girl named Maya. Maya had gone into anaphylactic shock, her airway closing, her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. Every second was a grain of sand slipping through an hourglass that was running out. Up front, David's partner had the sirens screaming and the lights flashing, a high-decibel plea for the world to move aside. They hit the hospital zone, a narrow, one-way corridor where the emergency lane is the only lifeline. That's where they encountered the lavender Tesla. It wasn't moving. It wasn't even idling. It was parked, plugged into a high-speed charger that Juliana had claimed despite the clear, emergency vehicles only signs. When David's partner blared the horn, Juliana didn't jump or panic. She slowly rolled down her window, looked back with an expression of mild annoyance and went back to her phone. She was on a FaceTime call with her interior designer, discussing the marble for her new guest house, and she wasn't about to let a noisy van interrupt her vision. When the case was called, Juliana stood up with a flourish, her $12,000 Chanel suit catching the light. She looked at David, who was still wearing his duty boots and a look of exhausted determination, and she scoffed loud enough for the microphone to catch it. She didn't see a hero, she saw an inconvenience. She told the court that the ambulance was being dramatic, and that she had every right to charge her vehicle because she pays triple the property taxes of anyone on that block. She argued that the paramedic was aggressive and had threatened her peace of mind by banging on her window. She spoke with a localized mid-Atlantic accent of the ultra-wealthy, a tone that suggested she was doing the court a favor by simply appearing. But as she spoke, Judge Judy began to lean forward, her jaw tightening. Judy didn't ask about the taxes or the car. She asked about the child. Juliana's response was a pivot that would go down in courtroom history. I didn't see a child, Judge. I saw a government employee who lacked the manners to wait 4 minutes for my charge to hit 80%. My time is valued at $5,000 an hour. I'm sure the emergency wasn't as dire as his ego. This is the moment where most people would stay quiet, but you are seeing something rare, the beginning of a total social demolition. If you believe that no amount of money gives a person the right to block a child's path to the hospital, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. We are documenting the exact moments where the untouchables finally get touched by the hand of justice. We are on a mission to hit our goal of 100,000 subscribers who stand for character over currency, and by subscribing you're joining a community that celebrates the downfall of the arrogant. Drop a justice in the comments if you're ready to see how Judge Judy uses Juliana's own words to trap her in a legal nightmare she can't buy her way out of. Now watch closely because the ghost evidence is about to be revealed, and Juliana's smirk is about to vanish forever. The arrogance in the room was so thick it was stifling. Juliana continued her testimony, claiming that David had fabricated the severity of the medical emergency to extort money from her husband's estate. She had brought a team of 3 high-priced attorneys who sat in the front row, shuffling papers and looking smug. They had filed motions to dismiss, claiming emotional distress for their client because the siren was too loud. They thought they were playing a game of legal chess, but they didn't realize Judge Judy was playing for keeps. David stood his ground, his voice cracking only once when he described the look in Maya's mother's eyes as they sat trapped behind that lavender bumper. He wasn't there for the money. He was there because he had promised that mother he would get her daughter to the surgeons in time, and Juliana Vanderbilt had almost made him a liar. Juliana laughed at his emotion, whispering to her assistant about low-class theatrics. Was a mistake. Judge Judy's hand slammed onto the bench, a sound like a gavel hitting a coffin. Miss Vanderbilt, Judy said, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. You think this is a performance? You think that man's tears are for your benefit? You have spent the last 10 minutes digging a hole so deep that not even your husband's billions can pull you out. You said you felt threatened. You said the sirens weren't on. You said you were a victim of a rude city employee. Well, I have a little surprise for you. You forgot that in the digital age, deleted is just a suggestion. The color began to drain from Juliana's face as Judy reached for a remote control. The ghost evidence wasn't just a rumor, it was a recorded confession of a billionaire's wife playing God with a child's life, and the reveal was going to be life-changing for everyone in that room. Judge Judy reached for the remote, her eyes never leaving Juliana's face, which was frozen in a mask of fading confidence. But before the video played, the judge wanted to pull back the curtain on the web of lies Juliana had spent the last hour weaving. She began to dissect Juliana's testimony with the precision of a surgeon, pointing out the glaring inconsistencies that only someone blinded by their own ego would miss. Juliana had claimed she was trapped by the ambulance, yet the hospital zone was clearly marked with 3 exit points she could have used at any moment. She had claimed she was fearful of David, yet she had the audacity to lower her window and initiate a verbal assault. The courtroom watched in rapt silence as Juliana's high-priced legal team began to look increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact with the bench. They had been hired to protect a billionaire's reputation, but they were quickly realizing that in this room, reputation was earned through truth, not bought with a retainer. Juliana tried to interrupt, her voice rising in a pitch of frantic entitlement. Your Honor, you are focusing on the wrong details. That man was pounding on my glass. Do you have any idea what custom-tinted reinforced windows cost? Judge Judy didn't even look up from her notes as she replied, I don't care if they were made of solid diamond, Miss Vanderbilt. I care about the 6-year-old girl who was turning blue behind your rear bumper while you were worried about a smudge on your window. The narrative then shifted to the testimony of David's partner, Sarah, who had been driving the ambulance that day. Sarah's voice was steady but filled with a raw, lingering trauma. She described the sheer helplessness of sitting behind the wheel, watching the seconds tick away on the monitor while Juliana's lavender Tesla sat like a stubborn monument to greed. Sarah explained that they couldn't reverse because of the traffic backed up behind them, and they couldn't jump the curb because of the high-speed charging equipment Juliana was using. They were caged. Sarah recounted how she could hear Maya's mother screaming in the back, not a scream of anger, but a scream of a mother who felt the life of her child slipping through her fingers. As Sarah spoke, David looked down at his lap, his jaw tight, reliving the moment he had to look that mother in the eye and tell her he was doing everything he could, even though a luxury car was standing between them and the operating room. The contrast in the room was staggering. On one side, 2 public servants who dealt in life and death. On the other, a woman who dealt in social standing and battery percentages. Juliana's lead attorney, a man whose suit probably cost more than David's annual salary, stood up to cross-examine Sarah. He tried to suggest that the ambulance crew was inexperienced and should have found a different route. He implied that the delay was actually caused by the paramedics' panic rather than his client's car. It was a classic blame-the-victim strategy designed to confuse the legal record, but it backfired spectacularly. Judge Judy interrupted him mid-sentence. Counselor, if you suggest one more time that an ambulance should have to navigate a maze because your client decided to park in a restricted emergency zone, I am going to find you in contempt along with her. Sit down. The lawyer sat, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. Juliana, however, remained defiant. She whispered loudly to her assistant that this was village justice, and that she would have the entire proceedings overturned by a real judge in a real court. She truly believed that she was just passing through a minor inconvenience, a temporary stop on her way back to her world of gala dinners and private jets. But then, the deep dive into Juliana's background began to reveal a pattern that made her behavior even more sinister. It wasn't the first time she had used her status to bypass the rules. David's lawyers produced a folder of incident reports from the very same hospital zone. It turned out Juliana had been cited 4 times in the last 6 months for the exact same behavior, using the emergency charging station because she didn't want to wait at the public ones. Each time, she had simply paid the fine as if it were a convenience fee. To Juliana, the law wasn't a boundary, it was a price tag. She had treated the safety of the public as a luxury she could afford to ignore. This revelation changed the entire energy of the trial. It was no longer a one-time mistake or a moment of poor judgment. It was a calculated, repetitive display of sociopathic indifference. The ghost evidence Judy had mentioned earlier was about to prove that on this specific day, Juliana knew exactly what she was doing and she enjoyed the power she held over the situation. She didn't just block the ambulance, she held it hostage. As the lights in the courtroom dimmed for the video playback, Juliana's smirk finally began to flicker, replaced by the first cold shadow of realization that her money had finally run out of power. The lights in the courtroom dimmed, and the large monitor mounted on the wall flickered to life, casting a cold blue glow over Juliana's increasingly pale face. Judge Judy's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Miss Vanderbilt, you told this court that you were terrified. You said the sirens were off, and you said you were the victim of a hostile city employee. Let's see what your own phone has to say about that." Suddenly, the screen filled with a high-definition video, but it wasn't from a security camera or a dashcam. It was a screen recording of Juliana's own Instagram live from that fateful afternoon. The footage showed Juliana's face, perfectly made up and smug, as she held her phone up to capture the ambulance behind her. The sound of the sirens was deafening, a relentless, piercing wail that filled the courtroom, completely debunking her claim that the area was quiet. Juliana could be seen laughing, turning the camera to show the paramedics frantically waving at her. "Ugh, you guys, look at this clown," she said in the video, her voice dripping with mockery. "He's literally banging on my window like I'm going to move my Tesla before it's at 80%. Does he not know who I am? The drama is actually hilarious." The courtroom was so silent you could hear a pin drop. The video continued, showing Juliana turning her camera toward the back of the ambulance, where the silhouette of David could be seen through the glass, desperately working to keep a dying child alive. Juliana's voiceover on the video was the final nail in her coffin. "I think he's trying to say it's an emergency, but honestly, my hair appointment is the real emergency here. Stay mad, sweetie." The video cut off and the lights slammed back on. Juliana looked like she had been struck by lightning. Her expensive lawyers were staring at their shoes, realizing that they weren't just representing a client. They were representing a villain whose own vanity had provided the evidence for her destruction. Judge Judy didn't say a word for a full minute. She simply stared at Juliana with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. The silence wasn't just uncomfortable. It was heavy with the weight of a moral reckoning that was long overdue. This is the point where most people realize that the untouchable elite are only untouchable until they meet someone who refuses to look away from the truth. If you are watching this and your blood is boiling at the sheer heartlessness of this woman, you need to hit that like button right now. We are showing you this because the world needs to see that no amount of money can erase the evidence of a rotten character. By liking this video, you are sending a message that you stand with the Davids of the world, the people who work the front lines while the Julianas of the world treat them like background characters in their own selfish lives. We are pushing for 200,000 likes on this video to show that the internet has no room for this kind of entitlement. If you want to see Judge Judy deliver the most satisfying verbal execution in the history of her career, stay with us because the next 5 minutes will change the way you think about justice forever. Juliana finally found her voice, but it was no longer the confident, aristocratic tone she had started with. It was a shrill, desperate defensive cry. That video was taken out of context. I was just trying to entertain my followers. It's a persona. You can't use my social media against me in a court of law. Judge Judy erupted. Out of context. You were live, Miss Vanderbilt. The context is that a 6-year-old girl was fighting for her breath while you were looking for likes. You sat there and lied to my face. You committed perjury in my courtroom, and you did it with a smile on your face. Juliana's lead attorney tried to stand up to offer a rebuttal, but Judy pointed a finger at him that looked like a loaded weapon. Sit down, counselor, before I have the bailiff remove you. You knew about this video. You had to have known, and you allowed her to testify to a lie. We will be having a conversation with the Bar Association about your conduct later. The shift in the room was absolute. The billionaire's wife was now just a defendant caught in a web of her own making. Judge Judy turned her attention back to David, the paramedic. Mr. Miller, she said, her voice softening for the first time, when you saw her laughing into her phone while you were trying to save that child, what did you do? David cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on Juliana. I didn't have time to be angry then, Your Honor. I just had to keep Maya alive. But seeing it now, seeing that she thought our struggle was a joke, it hurts. It hurts because that little girl didn't have a choice, and this woman chose to be an obstacle. The raw honesty of David's statement made Juliana's previous distress look pathetic. The trial had moved beyond a simple insurance claim or a traffic violation. It had become a trial of Juliana's soul. And according to the evidence on the screen, the verdict was already written in the hearts of everyone watching. Juliana clutched her $50,000 handbag as if it could protect her, but the walls of her gold-plated world were finally beginning to crumble. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking in a way that sounded like a final warning. The courtroom was charged with a static energy, the kind that precedes a total system failure. Miss Vanderbilt, Judy began, her voice dangerously calm, you have sat there for the last hour acting as if this courtroom is a minor inconvenience on your way to a gala. You have mocked a man who saves lives for a living, you have lied about the circumstances of a near-fatal event, and you have showcased a level of narcissism that is frankly breathtaking. But here is the part you didn't see coming. My staff didn't just find your deleted social media post. They contacted your husband's office. Juliana's eyes widened, and for the first time the billionaire's wife mask began to crack. Her hands, which had been so steady while she checked her Rolex earlier, were now visibly shaking. Judge Judy pulled a second folder from under her desk. It seems your husband, Mr. Vanderbilt, was quite surprised to learn about this lawsuit. In fact, he was so surprised that he provided us with the GPS logs from your Tesla, logs that he monitors for insurance purposes. Those logs show that you weren't just charging your car. You were parked in that emergency lane for 45 minutes before the ambulance even arrived. You weren't stuck, you were camping. You chose that spot because it was the closest to the entrance of a boutique that was having a private sale. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Juliana wasn't a victim of circumstance or a woman who made a mistake in a hurry. She was a woman who had calculatedly appropriated a life-saving space for her own shopping convenience. Juliana's lead attorney attempted to stand, his face a mask of professional panic. Your Honor, these GPS logs are private property. This is an invasion of... Judy didn't even let him finish. It's evidence of a crime, counselor. Sit down before I have you escorted out in zip ties. She turned her focus back to the shivering woman in the Chanel suit. You stood here and testified, under oath, that you were only there for a few minutes and that you felt trapped by the ambulance. The GPS shows you were there nearly an hour, and when the ambulance arrived, you had a clear path to exit through the south gate. You chose to stay. You chose to block them. You chose to film it for clout. You didn't just commit a traffic violation, Miss Vanderbilt. You committed a series of felonies. The weight of the situation finally seemed to penetrate Juliana's bubble of entitlement. The reality that her husband, the man whose name she used as a shield, had inadvertently provided the evidence of her downfall was a poetic irony that wasn't lost on the gallery. People were whispering, phones were being held up to record the historic collapse, and the bailiff moved a few inches closer to the defendant's table. Juliana began to sob, but it wasn't the sob of someone who was sorry, it was the high-pitched, frantic wail of someone who realized they could no longer control the narrative. It was just a prank. My followers love when I act like a diva. I didn't think the kid was actually sick. Judge Judy's gavel came down with a thunderous crack that silenced the room. A prank? You think the oxygen levels of a 6-year-old girl are a prank? You think the life of a child is a prop for your social media feed? You are a hollow, cruel woman, Miss Vanderbilt. And you are about to find out that in this courtroom your persona carries a very real prison sentence. Judy then turned to David, who was watching the scene with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Mr. Miller, I want you to know that the evidence provided by this woman's own vanity has opened a door that she can never close. We are no longer just talking about a $10,000 civil judgment. We are talking about the total dismantling of her untouchable status. The law is finally catching up to you, Juliana, and it's moving a lot faster than your Tesla. The courtroom was now a theater of the absurd, with Juliana begging her lawyers to make it stop, while Judge Judy prepared to deliver a verdict that would echo through every country club and high-rise in the city. The billionaire's wife was gone. In her place was a woman who had finally run out of road. Judge Judy stood up, her black robe billowing like the wings of an avenging angel. The courtroom air felt as though it had been vacuum-sealed. No one dared to breathe as she prepared to deliver a verdict that would do more than just settle a debt. It would dismantle a dynasty of arrogance. Miss Vanderbilt, Judy began, her voice resonating with a finality that made the billionaire's wife flinch. You came into this room thinking that the world is your private playground and that the rest of us are just obstacles in your way. You thought you could lie, mock a dying child, and buy your way out of a felony with a smile and a social media post. But you forgot one thing. The law doesn't care about your followers, and it certainly doesn't care about your husband's bank account. In this room you are not a Vanderbilt. You are a defendant who has shown a depravity of heart that I haven't seen in 40 years on the bench. With a sharp motion, Judy signed the final judgment papers, the sound of the pen scratching against the parchment echoing through the silent room. First, I am awarding the plaintiff, David Miller, the maximum judgment of $10,000 for the destruction of emergency equipment and the emotional distress caused by your intentional obstruction. But that is merely the tip of the iceberg. Because you lied under oath about your location, your intentions, and your fear, I am finding you in summary contempt of court. You will be taken into custody immediately for a period of 30 days to reflect on whether your hair appointment was worth the loss of your liberty. Juliana let out a strangled cry, reaching for her lawyer's arm, but he pulled away, his face a mask of professional distance. The bailiff stepped forward, the metallic jingle of handcuffs sounding like a death knell for Juliana's social life. If this moment of absolute justice makes you feel like standing up and cheering, then you are exactly why we make these videos. You've just watched a woman who thought she was above the law, get humbled by the truth, and if you believe that character should always triumph over currency, hit that subscribe button right now. We are building a community of millions who refuse to let the powerful trample on the hardworking, and by subscribing, you ensure that these stories of accountability reach every corner of the globe. Smash that like button and comment, "Untouchable and no more," to show David and every other first responder that we have their backs. Don't go anywhere because the final words Judge Judy had for Juliana are something you will be quoting for the rest of the year. But I'm not done, Judy continued, ignoring Juliana's hysterical sobbing. I am officially referring the video evidence of your Instagram live and the GPS logs to the district attorney. Your actions constituted willful endangerment of a minor and obstruction of emergency medical services. Both are felonies. Your husband might be able to buy you a new car, but he cannot buy you a new reputation once a jury sees you laughing at a dying child. Bailiff, remove this woman from my sight. As the handcuffs clicked shut around Juliana's slender wrists, the reality of her new life set in. The $50,000 handbag was left on the table, a useless piece of leather in a world where she was now just an inmate. As she was led toward the holding cell, Juliana looked back at David one last time. She expected to see spite or triumph in his eyes, but all she saw was pity. David wasn't a man who cared about her downfall. He was a man who cared about the child he had managed to save despite her. Maya had survived the surgery, a miracle that occurred in spite of Juliana's vanity. Judge Judy sat back down, her expression softening only when she looked at David. Mr. Miller, thank you for what you do. People like you are the heartbeat of this country. People like her are just the noise. With one final, thunderous strike of the gavel, the case was closed. Juliana Vanderbilt entered the courtroom as a queen of high society and left as a cautionary tale for the digital age. A vivid reminder that while money can buy many things, it can never buy a soul, and it can never, ever hide the truth from Judge Judy. The trial was over, but the message was just beginning to go viral. In the court of justice, everyone is equal, and the arrogant will always, eventually run out of road.